All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. I'll just let a few of you join. See who's jumping on this evening. Going to do some live essay feedback. Trying to make it a regular thing just to help you guys out. I know students in New South Wales have gone back to school this week. The holiday periods are a little bit out of whack this year. We've got Victoria, who went back a couple of weeks ago. So the holidays weren't quite lined up. But for those who are doing the HSC, for those who are at any school in New South Wales, welcome back to school. Hopefully you weren't dreading the return too much. Some of you were quite excited. Spoke to a few students. Good to hear that a lot of students are super keen to go back to school because they get to see their friends, get back into a nice structure. So we'll do some live feedback. I've had plenty of submissions from you guys out there. So if you are keen to get some free feedback from myself, from the team, make sure you submit a paragraph. Might be an introduction, might be a body paragraph, could be anything really, but keep it relatively small, makes it more likely that we'll be able to go through it, and submit that using the link in this video when you can get free feedback. So Amar, great to see you here. Thanks for the comments. You've sent through your paragraph. Awesome. What was your paragraph on? I've got a few here ready to go. Not sure if one of those is yours. We just tend to go in order unless we can't use one of them. But in most cases, we'll just go in the order that they're submitted. So make sure you get in early. Amar, because you're the first one to comment as well, you have booked yourself, if you want, priority spot in Jeddle's Mastermind episode, which gives you a chance to play for typically around $100. So if you want to take me up on that offer, if you want to be on the Jeddle Mastermind series, which is part of our YouTube videos, then you can play for up to $100. And just let me know. Just email us. Go to the Jeddle website. Go to the Contact Us form. Let me know that you want to play Mastermind, and we'll go from there. Okay, so just submit your email there, and we'll give you a priority spot because you were first to comment on this live stream. Remember, you're beautiful just the way you are. Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm going to get into the feedback in a moment. Just going to give some other students a chance to jump on. Amar, sounds good. Just again, just email us and let us know if you're keen. And that way we can ensure you get a priority spot. We've got quite a few students asking to come onto the show, do a little bit of English revision, get to win a nice little prize at the end, $100 cash. And it's as simple as that. Thinking of running a kind of a bigger prize promotion soon for the launch of Jedd-AI, which is our AI marking and feedback platform, which I'm going to be using to do the feedback this evening. So about to get into that in just a moment. Remember, you're beautiful. This will just go for, let's say, 50 minutes to an hour, maybe less. I'm going to try and be a little bit more disciplined. I like to go in depth with my feedback, but if I can just keep things kind of simpler for you, I'll try and do so. So let's see if I can just get this screen sharing, and we'll go from there. So I am using Jeddle's marking and feedback platform here, which features Jedd-AI, which is our AI marking tool. It's been trained by teachers, can give you instant and unlimited at the moment feedback for your drafts. You can also get expert feedback from the Jeddle community. So it could be myself, it could be someone else, could be an experienced teacher, an HSE marker, a marker in your particular state. You can actually submit responses to get that human feedback, or you can submit to Jedd-AI to get that instant feedback in a teacher-like form. So it's like having a 24/7 tutor on this platform. Just go to jeddle.com, check out Jedd-AI if you want to subscribe. And there should be a promo code FB24. If that's not working, hit me up with an email and we'll give you a bit of a discount to get started. Now, let me just put myself in the corner. I like to be in the corner in these ones. Okay, glad you want to see a longer session. That's good. I'll go for as long as I can, but I do want to keep it kind of concise as well for people. I know I can kind of rant a little bit at times. Okay, your draft's on Mod A. So again, anyone else tuning in right now for this live essay feedback, if you want to submit yours, use the link below this video. Should be a link there for you to submit feedback. If not, email us using the contact us page at Jeddle.com. And if you're interested in our AI marketing and feedback platform, getting access to tutors, teachers, any time of the day, you want to get instant feedback, you can do so using Jedd-AI, which will be at Jeddle.com. So I'll just put that up here. Go to Jeddle.com, click Jedd-AI or Jedd-AI, and you can get started there. All right, cool. Let's get into it, guys. Keen to go over some of this feedback. So just on the platform here, let's go through and provide some feedback. To kick us off with, or to start us off, let's go through this particular response on T.S. Eliot's poetry. Now, if you're not doing T.S. Eliot, fear not, you'll still benefit from the feedback. I'm going to make it very accessible and applicable to any text, okay? So we're just looking at the essay writing itself in this case. Let's take a look and see how we can improve this response. First things first, let's look at the question. How has your study of Eliot's poetry altered and expanded your understanding of the existential angst that pervaded modern society? So it's quite a specific question, and this is based on the New South Wales syllabus, Module B. The Module B questions for a critical study of literature, or if you're doing English Standard Close Study, they tend to be the most specific. So they can actually specify particular aspects of the text, specific themes, specific aspects of the form of the text. They might even link to context directly. Module A questions tend to be a little bit broader. They're a little bit friendlier because it's hard enough having to talk about two texts in the one essay for Module A. So Module B, because you're just looking at one text, in this case, we're looking at T.S. Eliot's poetry as a collection. So even if you've studied 5 poems, understand that you have to consider that poetry as a collection, as one text, even though there are technically 5 smaller texts within it. You still focus on usually at least 2 poems, 2 to 3 poems. I would tend to do 3 poems in a response, 1 per paragraph, but you can also make links to the other 2 poems that are in the set of 5 to show that you're actually engaging with the poetry as a whole. So that's a key thing for Eliot. And remember that Module B questions can be very specific. So that's the first thing to note here. Now, keywords of the question. What do you think of the keywords? Existential angst, okay? Anxiety. What's existential mean? It means you're questioning the purpose of life. That's essentially what existential means, right? It's questioning your existence. Why am I here? Why am I alive? What's the point of life? Deep, dark questions. But in modern society, when it says modern here, we're talking about the period of modernism, right? So early 20th century, which is the early 1900s. This is around the period of World War I. We have rapid industrialization. People are moving from the countryside into cities. There's lots of factories being built. People are actually more isolated now, right? People are talking more about the 8-hour workday, working 9 to 5. Everyone knows that song, working 9 to 5. That is a phenomenon that's relatively new. And that came with industrialization as we started to really focus as a society on producing things more rapidly. And with producing things more rapidly, that can correlate, and it did correlate at this period, at least for Eliot in his observations, with spiritual degradation. People were no longer in tune with the meaning of life. They lost purpose. They lost soul. You know, when someone says you kind of lost the soul of something, right? That there was a soullessness here because everyone just started producing things. Capitalism was on the rise, which means it's all about building things and selling things. And there is a loss of purpose, a loss of connection with people. People became isolated from their communities. They weren't just kind of growing up and on farms and being very connected with their family. Now they were working for bigger businesses and working in these factories, and they had this new kind of structure to live by. So there was a natural questioning of meaning, of purpose that came with this social change, right? This is a period of social transition, social flux. And there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of isolation, and people were even abandoning religion at times, especially if you think about World War I and the turbulence, the chaos that came with a world war. right? People are naturally going to start questioning things. They're going to question their faith. And that's actually going to lead to a sense of disorientation. People aren't going to know where to look, if you will, for meaning. Okay, I can't look to God for meaning. I can't look to my religion. I can't look to my traditional way of living because now we live in a different way. We're all in the cities. There's this urbanization. There's pollution everywhere, right? People had this sense of lack, right? They lacked direction. They lacked faith. And this is present throughout Eliot's poetry, okay? So we're talking early 1900s here, World War I, rapid industrialization, people questioning religious faith, loss of spiritual connection, loss of interconnectedness. There are some really important contextual ideas. Also, when World War I was on, traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity were challenged. Okay, so modernism challenged how we viewed the role of the man, the role of the woman. While men went to war, women were actually taking on a lot of the men's jobs. So if we're talking about, early days of feminism, first wave feminism, and kind of rewriting the book on gender roles, this was a big part of it. If all the men are off to war, then women are going to have to keep the economy flowing. So we're seeing men's roles challenged. Okay, so that's going to be a social disruptor. And men might feel disempowered when they come back from war and things have changed in terms of the power dynamics and the relationship with women. So these are really important things to consider. Now, depending on the poems you're looking at, that's going to determine which of these contextual elements you should really zoom in on. But, if we're talking about proof rock, which I can see this response focuses on at first, and we're just going to look at a paragraph here, then certainly the masculinity point's big because it's about someone who feels really insecure as a man. It's about someone who is challenging his purpose. It's about someone who's psychologically troubled because they don't know themselves anymore. They're questioning their identity. Think about why one's identity is destabilized when there's a war going on, right? World War I, when there's a shift in social structures due to industrialization and everyone now working in these factories and feeling like a cog in the machine. This period of human history is where a lot of these phrases and ideas actually come from. When you hear people say, oh, just another cog in the machine, it comes from these periods of rapid industrialization where producing things and selling things became a huge focus. And again, people lost sight of what's truly meaningful. So let's get into the response here. We're talking about existential angst. We're talking about it in modern society. We're talking about modernism here. Modernism, which is this period in the early 1900s, early 20th century. And what's important, what I recommend you all do, by the way, is whenever you are looking at a specific poem, it's always good to know roughly when it was published, right? You've got to know that exact context. So if this paragraph response here, this is a body paragraph, is going to be looking at proof rock, what I suggest you all do is you just jump on to Google. I'm going to do it right now. Proof rock, date of publication. You might not always get an exact date, right? Here it's saying Alfred Prufrock, dramatic monologue. Okay, dramatic monologue, that's important as part of the form. And it's saying it was published in 1915 and then came later in 1917. So it's really important to know roughly the period there. And if we're thinking, okay, Prufrock, the poem came around 1915, we know that World War I has already begun. 1914 to 1918 is World War I. So you've got to know those dates of the world wars when you look at texts produced in the 20th century, because so much of the meaning hinges upon and relies upon those periods, right? So we got to understand that this is early on in the First World War, which is going to be different. It's going to shape a different understanding to it being produced after World War I. So you've got to take all of this into consideration. Let's get into this though. Eliot adopts a modernized, just make sure you're doing Australian English, not or British English, right? Not American English with the Z's going on here. Get rid of those Z's. We're looking for S's. Eliot adopts a modernized dramatic monologue. Maybe you mean modernist here, right? Maybe you mean modernist because that's the form and that's the period, in fact, in which this was written. So Eliot adopts a modernist dramatic monologue in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Okay, try to avoid the double quotation as well. I might not make a note on the whole of that, but typically you would underline or do single quotations or underline. If you were typing it up, you'd actually do it italicized. But when you hand write this response in an exam, you can't show italicized writing, right? It's very hard to distinguish that from normal writing. So you would typically use single quotations, or more traditionally, I would recommend just using an underline. Whenever you are in doubt, underline the title of the text you're looking at. Okay, Eliot adopts a dramatic monologue exploring the existential questions. Well, we've got existential, which is a good link to the question here about the true meaning of life that manifest in the psyche of a psychologically, so a little bit repetitive there, tortured individual, mirroring the existential angst, again, a little bit repetitive with existential, and uncertainty that arose in the modern milieu. Now, this use of the word modern is kind of a problem, because modern just means like contemporary. Modern, as they're trying to use it, is relating to modernism, right? So you want to be important to make sure it's sounding like that, not just something that's modern, something that is contemporary, that exists right now. We're not talking about now, we're talking about early 1900s. So just be careful with the use of the word modern there. Make sure if it's modernist or modernism, you use it. Sometimes it requires a capitalization, but yeah, just make sure that that is consistent throughout. And yeah, in terms of the repetition here, let's go back. So Eliot adopts that. It explores existential questions. I'm not sure what those questions are. So you've said it explores questions, but you haven't said what they are. You say what they're about, though, about the true meaning of life. Little bit vague there, that manifest in the psyche of a psychologically tortured individual. So I think existential questions about the true meaning of life, the issue there, if we're looking at the kinds of comments you can get there, is just a lack of specificity. So if I click on a lack of specificity, right? What do you actually mean here? Existential questions about the true meaning of life. Existential questions are questions about the true meaning of life. So you're kind of repeating yourself there and not giving us the necessary, the requisite specificity, right? You're not actually telling us enough there, okay? We want to have a very clear idea of what you're going to talk about. We'll probably get more clarity on that after we've read some of your evidence. I don't know exactly what point you want to make there, but make sure you're a bit more specific about that and try to avoid more cliched expressions like the true meaning of life. Then you say that manifest in the psyche of a psychologically. So why don't you just get rid of this, that manifest in the psyche of, you can either get rid of that or get rid of the first bit. Manifest, or that project through a psychologically tortured individual, right? Project through a psychologically tortured individual. Mirroring. Now, we wouldn't want to have any more clauses than this. So there's a lot of commas. The more commas you have in a sentence, the clunkier it becomes, the harder it is to follow your point. Try and be sharper, punchier, more concise. This is the maximum amount of clauses or commas I would want to include here. Mirror in the existential angst and uncertainty. Anyone know what I'm going to say to that? You've got the double up problem. You're using existential angst and uncertainty. You using two very similar words or synonyms doesn't earn you extra points. It actually takes away from the impact that you're having in that sentence, because you're saying more of the same thing. So it's diluting the significance of each individual word. So what we want to do there is, again, it's to do with lack of specificity, right? You're listing, you need to expand on one of these rather than convincing yourself that you're actually expanding by adding more of the same. Because really, you've just repeated the question, existential angst. But that's what the question said. You need to go beyond the question, and going beyond the question doesn't mean simply adding more synonyms, so angst and uncertainty. No, that doesn't show that you really understand the question, because you're not unpacking, you're just repeating it in a different way. So I hope that makes sense. We would keep mirroring the existential angst, but you need to expand on that. You do expand here and you say that arose in the modern milieu. I mean, maybe I would say that arose in the wake of early World War I, if that in fact was an influence. And again, you have to do your research on this, okay? When you're looking at these poems, when you're looking at your text, go and research. It's a quick Google search. If you use ChatGPT or something like that, verify it with other sources online, because it has a high error rate. ChatGPT will give you an answer whether it knows it or not. So be wary that if you do a quick search and you say, what were the contextual influences for the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock? It might be wrong. So whatever it says, go and verify it with other sources online. You can also obviously check out the Jeddle resources, which have been already verified and they already provide things in a really concise way. So in the modern milieu is very vague. So instead, we would want to say something that like in the wake of, that arose in the wake of early World War I, right? Or you could say in the wake of early World War I and the impending global destruction that it threatened, right? Or the potential global destruction. Okay, so we need to be a little bit more specific with the contextual reference there, okay? So we'll link that to a contextual issue. The poem begins with an epigraph of Dante's Inferno, which follows Dante's descent into hell and parallels Prufrock's own internal suffering. Okay, challenging the titular love song as the poem is ironically anything but a love song. Well, I like how you've dealt with irony there because you've said anything but that. So it makes it clear that you understand what irony is and why that's ironic. It starts off with this poem that's actually all about suffering and it's nothing to do with love. So it's certainly subverting that particular form. So that's a pretty good start. It was feeling a little bit descriptive and storytelling. The poem begins. Just be careful with that phrasing because it's sounding like you're just describing rather than analyzing. So you could say the beginning of the poem, or you could say something like, yeah, I'm going to put this under, by the way, category-wise. It's important to know what this relates to. This relates to making sure you're not storytelling. So analytical tone, right? So what we're going to say is Eliot's decision to begin the poem with an epigraph of the thing, right? Then you say what that does, okay? Because we then need to go into the effect. Don't just describe what you're doing there, all right? The poem begins with, let's avoid that intro because it's going to make you do the wrong thing at times. Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. The free verse structure. I like that you've got a big focus on form. See this? This student's done a really good job at focusing on form. The free verse structure. Always talk about the structure, the narrative voice, the style, the overall style of a text. That is going to get you bonus points because you're engaging with the overall composition instead of just zooming in on specific lines and finding those micro techniques, right? I always say, remember, Biggie Smalls. Biggie Smalls. Biggie is your big techniques, your form, things to do with the overall structure, the overall style. What is the text type itself? What type of poem is it? It's a dramatic monologue. Where it says dramatic monologue, that's an element of the form, right? That is the way that it's been built. We're not analyzing a film here. We're analyzing a dramatic monologue. That is a poem, right? So we need to actually be in tune with that and address those key aspects of form. And then the smalls, Biggie Smalls, smalls means you still refer to specific techniques that are present as well, such as metaphors, types of repetition, imagery. Those things are important as well. But you need to couple them and pair them together to really show that advanced understanding of how texts are written and why. So the free verse structure reflects the fragmented society where individuals... See, when you just say the fragmented society, too vague, right? Too vague here. What fragmented society? Do you mean the fragmentation of modernist society in which individuals were unable to and then, so that's how I would actually replace that. Let's put it there. Okay, are you trying to say reflects the fragmentation of modernist society? Always try and be a little bit more specific. This student said the fragmented society. What about the fragmentation of modernist society? In which, or an industrialized society, or a rapidly industrializing society? Be specific about the type of society even though they're going to describe what happens in the society, always good if you can add a specific label, especially if it links to context. Okay, so then you've integrated you've integrated a quote here, and instead turned to restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, reflecting the urban squalor brought about by the ambient disorderliness of the modern industrialized city. So see how there's a bit of repetition here, but also you've done the expansion late. So you could have brought this in earlier when you were talking about that fragmented society. The sentence is a little bit drawn out. And I also feel like, and I'm not sure, you've got free verse structure, you've got the biggie, but do you have the smalls, biggie smalls? I can't see the individual technique. Maybe I'm missing it. But I feel like if you're going to bring in a quote, it's good to address the overall structure, free verse structure, but then to bring in a specific technique that applies to your selected quote or evidence. So, restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. You would have to try and find a specific language feature there. We'd want to view that in the context of the poem as a whole. So I am only viewing this right now in isolation, haven't pulled up the full poem, as we're just kind of doing this on the spot. But restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. Okay, so certainly the way you've described it as like disorderly, that makes sense. But can you see a language feature in this quote? I mean, in poetry, the good thing about poems is they're loaded with techniques. So interesting to see if you guys can actually spot any potential techniques in there. So right now we're looking at this line here, restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. I mean, you've got the repetition of the night. It creates that that kind of darker ambience, right? If we're talking about that ambient disorderliness, tough word to say. So you do have the repetition of the word night, right? Not the strongest technique to accompany our free verse structure commentary. Restless nights. Now, if this was all in one line, you could also look at the rhythm of it. Restless nights in one night cheap hotels, 9 beats. Sometimes you can look for the 10 beats in case it's iambic pentameter, but that's also got more to do with the structure and the rhythm rather than any particular thing here. I mean, one night cheap hotels, you've definitely got that adjectival kind of connotation. You've got connotations here that the one night cheap hotels, it's feeling quite grimy and dirty, isn't it? So you can definitely refer to the connotations of the cheap hotels and how that gives off the impression of something quite, I mean, here you say squalor, but, you know, sordid, grimy, anything, any kind of vocabulary that you can attribute to the impression you get from something, you know, like a one-night cheap hotel. Certainly as well, restless nights. Like there's something emotive about that. You know, we're forced to feel that no one is settled. They're incredibly unsettled here. So you could refer some, I suppose, to emotive language as well here. But perhaps this is part of a broader imagery. Keen to see what you guys think. But again, make sure you only use quotes that you have kind of a strong technical or technique link to. So you make sure there's a clear technique in there. Excuse me. But I like the effect. I just think you could have incorporated some of those elements up here. Quite a long sentence. Furthermore, the existential crisis is exemplified through the introduction of the motif of time in the 5th stanza. Now, whether or not this is necessary, I don't know. I tend to avoid specifying where things happened. I like to bring in the evidence chronologically because it tends to correlate with the progression of ideas. But unless you have a specific reason to mention that something comes up in the 5th stanza and it links back to the 1st, I would avoid that. Okay? So I might be missing something there, but I would, just for the sake of clear and concise expression, just remove that part because you don't need it. It's like in a play, you don't have to say in Act 1, in Act 2, etc. So the existential crisis is exemplified through the introduction of the motif in the 5th stanza. Also feels very wordy, right? You're saying the existential crisis. It just feels kind of vague when you bring that in. The persona's existential crisis is exemplified through the motif. Yeah, I don't even know if you need introduction of. Seems to be a little bit wordy, this response. That's what I'm getting from it. Try and tighten up the language by removing some of these parts here that aren't necessary. And the repetition of I grow old, which highlights the transience of time through Prufrock's acute awareness of his impending death. Yeah, so I don't even know if you need the existential crisis is exemplified through, right? It feels like you should just go furthermore. The motif of time highlights the transient. So you could almost take out this bit unless you want to say this existential crisis is. Excuse me. So let's clear this one out. Highlights the transience of life through Prufrock's acute awareness. I like it up to there. You tend to add the comma here and add the next clause. So reflecting his uncertainty through the repetition of do I dare. But you've just said the repetition of I grow, and then it's kind of like you're extending the sentence and now saying through this, it's through this technique. Well, you've just said it was through that technique. So cut that one out as well. I think less is more sometimes. Sometimes you just need to stop once you've made the point. It's impactful. Make sure it's specific enough and then end it. Don't feel like you always need to add more clauses and add more commas and then extend things, because here it's only detracting from the sophistication of the response. Prufrock is anguished by heightened feelings of inferiority as he mentions his bald spot and how his hair is growing thin. That reminds me of someone I know. Which reveals the modern obsession with vanity and fear of modern scrutiny. Okay, just again, careful with the wording here, the way it's styled, because Prufrock is anguished. It sounds like you're storytelling. Prufrock is anguished by. It's like you're telling me about Prufrock. Make sure you frame things analytically by leading with the technique. You don't always have to lead with the technique, but just the way this is worded, it's just sounding like you're going to describe to me something, okay? So we want to be more analytical with the way we frame it. So it might be like Prufrock's perceived inferiority, as he mentions this, reveals this. It shouldn't be like Prufrock is anguished. The is creates this storytelling vibe. Okay, so let's go to the next bit, which reveals the modern. Now, did we get a technique in this sentence as well? Bald spot, how his hair is growing thin. I mean, you've at least got the visual imagery there, but you could also inquire as to whether bald spot, is that symbolic? Is the thinning hair symbolic? Does he feel like meaning is receding for him, just like his hair? Is meaning thinning out for him, right? It feels like his essence is falling off him, just like his hair, right? His hair's growing thin. He's anxious. So I think there's definitely at least something symbolic or metonymic there. So make sure that when you're bringing in quotes, what the markers are going to be looking for is, have you included techniques to accompany those quotes, right? So we want to have a technique used to embedded in there. And a good way of saying it is just saying, mentions his metonymic, which means it's like a symbol, but it represents something broader, okay? Maybe it's symbolic more so, who knows? I mean, you have to inquire as to that, right? I'm just looking at this in isolation. But metonymic or symbolic. Symbol typically relates to more conventional things. It's probably more metonymic here, which is like a symbol, but it represents something broader, okay? Bald spot, this could link to, again, meaning is receding, a recession of meaning, okay? Now, I'm using the word recession in the way I'm explaining it because receding is to do with the technique, or rather the quote, but it's also linked to what it's about. So try and use words that relate to the quote when you explain what they mean. That's why I've chosen recession of meaning instead of like a lack of meaning. It could be lack as well because he's lacking hair. Try and get that connection. And again, try not to list things. See, it's like the modern obsession with vanity and fear of modern security. Just pick one and make sure you go deep enough with that one, okay? So no listing. Moreover, his intertextual reference to Shakespeare's eponymous Hamlet as he mourns how he is not Prince Hamlet, nor was he meant to be. So you've got intertextual reference, at least you've got the technique there. Reflects his vacillation, which means he's going up and down, hesitating, deliberating. He's vacillating, so he doesn't know which way to think. He's I'd say kind of thoughts are going up and down, and he's bouncing around. Okay, that is derived from social constructs and desires to conform. See how we've got the social constructs and desires to conform? Try and word this in a way where it's just one thing, not two things separated by end. The end is the problem. End is the problem, okay? Let's go with is derived from the desire to conform to social constructs. See how if we say it like that, instead of saying social constructs and desire to conform, if we just say that is derived from the desire to conform to social constructs, that's all one idea, rather than presenting it as these two fragmented pieces that sound like they're just repeating each other. Frame things as one rather than using and or and make them sound separate. Hope that makes sense. That's a really important tip for improving the sophistication of your writing. Okay. Finally, the metaphor in the concluding verse, till human voices wake us and we drown. So you got metaphor, emphasizes the tormented modern society and the futility of modern existence. What we're doing here is we're just not getting deep enough with the explanation. So you're kind of rattling off vague terms about tormented modern society, futility of modern existence, but you're not getting deep into what this quote's really about. You're not linking it to context. You're now not engaging with the form and the bigger techniques. So this is all too vague, and you're doubling up. So we need to go far deeper into what this quote actually means. The fact that we drown, wherever you use the word that relates to this idea of drowning, what is this a metaphor for? It hasn't really been explained here. Ultimately, through exploring a sense of social exclusion through a psychoanalytic lens, okay, I like that language, sounds familiar. Eliot masterfully enhances, you don't even need to say masterfully, right? A lot of students are doing that these days. If it does say evaluate, if the question says evaluate, maybe there's merit to that. Otherwise, I would just say Eliot enhances our understanding of the existential angst that pervaded modern society. Okay, that pervaded modern society, but it's not really, that's just repeating the question. The question was about existential angst pervading modern society. So you've got to make sure you go beyond that. You've repeated the question. You need to say why there was existential angst and why it pervaded society, right? Might be a more specific contextual link like World War I, as we talked about, changing gender roles. It depends what you have focused on in the paragraph. So you need to be more specific at the end there. All right, I hope that helps. Anyone have any questions about that before I just move on to the next one? I'm going to look at some of the comments that have been made throughout here as well. So yes, you can all submit your responses. I'm not going to get to any new responses, certainly in this session, but use the link that goes to the form where you can enter in a question and part of your response. Amar, can I look at your text and human experience paragraph, not your module A? I can if it's included here, but if I don't get to yours here, I'll have to try and get it to it in the next one. Shoot me an email or resubmit that in the form if I don't address it tonight. Patrick, do I offer feedback for English Extension 1? Of course. Do a lot of stuff for Extension 1. Even on Jeddle.com, you've got some amazing resources there for specific Extension 1 texts. Might be Worlds of Upheaval that you're doing. Might be reimagined worlds, literary mindscapes, right? All of those particular electives, there are heaps of resources for. Okay, and problem here for one of you is I tend to struggle with developing strong ideas and then go on tangents and end up overanalyzing my responses. So where do you essentially start? How can you actually build upon ideas to create a sophisticated response? So let's pause here and address this. If you tend to not develop your ideas. You're more likely to be repeating the question, listing a bunch of buzzwords like the text is about power and control. You saw lots of examples in that previous response that we just deconstructed. How do you actually build upon them? You've got to start by asking yourself the right questions. So you might say, what's the text about? And you might start at a very high level and say, look, it's about trust or it's about power. Then you ask yourself, well, how do I break that down? Because I don't want to just say it's about power. So what you do is you ask yourself mini questions about that word, about that theme. So, okay, power. What type? What type of power is it? It's political power. It's ideological power. It's absolute power. It's emotional power. Could be lots of things. Look for adjectives there, okay, that you can put before the word. That's allowing you to be more specific already. What type of power? You then go to how, why, and so what. So the mini questions you ask yourself in relation to the key terms of the question and in relation to any ideas that you have that you already want to talk about when you're drafting an essay. So I want to talk about power. Okay, what type of power? Political power. Okay, what do you want to say about power? So what in itself is another question. What type and what? What do you want to say about power? Power can lead to corruption. Okay, great. Now you're actually telling me an idea. You're not just using a buzzword. Political power can be corruptible, or humans can be corrupted by political power. Great, that's an idea. Okay, how does power work? Why do people want power? They want power in order to control. So in seeking the ability to control, individuals may become corrupted by political power. So now you're further developing that idea. You're fleshing it out by asking these questions. And then you might also ask yourself, well, so what? Why does that matter? Okay, power is corruptible and people become corrupt when they want to get in power. Well, that's bad because, why is that bad, right? So what? What's the significance? Well, you don't have to all do this all in the same sentence, by the way. This is just you developing the idea out. It might be one of these sentences for each body paragraph or over a couple of sentences in your introduction. But you might say, well, due to the corruptibility of power, this represents a threat to the autonomy, the individuality of the collective. Because, right, why does it represent a threat? Because they are likely to be manipulated by those in power and thus deprived of their ability to think independently, to think for themselves. So just there, I've kind of fleshed out this idea from the word power, and I would be answering this in relation to the text that I've studied. So the text will give you the answers here and whatever your interpretation of that is. But effectively, you start with a key term. Then you ask yourself what type, what, how, why, so what, and just flesh out the idea that way and try and understand, first of all, what's the problem associated with this concept? And is there a possible solution? Always frame your ideas that way because it helps you with the essay structure as well. So if I'm thinking about any kind of term, power, manipulation, I'm going to think, okay, what type, how, why, so what? But then I'm also going to think in terms of my essay, what's the problem with power and how do we overcome that problem? And that kind of gives me a nice framework for my essay, and the text that you study tend to go through the problem and then whether or not there's a solution, and if so, what that is. So there might not be a clear resolution offered in the text. Maybe the text itself is part of the solution because it's someone voicing their opinion, free speech. But the point is that you need to ask the right questions about the themes that you want to look at and then develop them with that problem solution framework. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for how you can think about things and develop them. And again, make sure in the more specific instance where you're actually writing something, don't list things. Don't say power and corruption. Relate things together and present your ideas as one concept. Don't give me 3 buzzwords. Give me one concept that ties things together and then flesh them out by asking those mini questions. Okay, you also got to do your research, link things to context. There's lots of other elements there, but that's really key. Now, Patrick, in terms of related texts for Worlds of Upheaval, you're doing Frankenstein, Metropolis. There are a couple of kind of guidelines when you're thinking about related texts. I tend to like to do a unique text type. So you're doing Frankenstein, a novel, which is in the epistolary form. It's in the form of letters, but it's still a novel. And it's, you know, a dystopian novel at that, or Gothic, I should say, not dystopian, Gothic genre. And Metropolis is a film, right? That's a German expressionist film. So you've got those two forms. So it's always good to kind of bring in a related that is not necessarily the same. However, that's not a complete bar. I mean, if I'm thinking just off the top of my head of good world of upheaval texts, I mean, one of my favorite recent ones is Parasite. The film Parasite is one of the best ones that I've seen recently in terms of films. So that would be a really nice compliment there, especially to Metropolis. I mean, you don't want to have texts that are going to say the same thing, but, you know, Metropolis being produced around, you know, 1920s, 1927 or whenever that came out, started being made, I think, around 1924. But that's a German expressionist film made off the back of World War I and, you know, hyperinflation and Germany suffering a lot of economic and social catastrophes after that. And then you've got the lead up to the Great Depression, hasn't hit yet. Rise of Hitler hasn't quite started, but, you know, he was a fan of that kind of that Weimar cinema. And, you know, and you've got this failed Weimar Republic. You've got all those very specific things going on. Then you've got Parasite, a more contemporary film about capitalism and the social divide that and the inequities that it creates as a result of capitalism, the inescapability of it. Parasite, one of the best films I've watched in recent years, maybe in the last like 10 years. It's definitely one of the most impactful films I've ever seen. Top 3 for impact. I would be going to Parasite for that. Okay, and appreciate the feedback, by the way, guys. I appreciate that you guys get something out of this. Good to know what's helping you. Let me know if things aren't as helpful as well. But back to related texts, just thinking off the top of my head as well for other ones. I did make a list. I know we've got a list on the Jeddle resources, Jeddle site. I also made an email. Maybe what I'll do for you, actually, if you guys are willing to wait, I'm going to quickly find a couple of other good related texts here, because I know I made a good list here. We're thinking about texts that explore periods of upheaval, you know, where there's a sense of chaos or maybe chaos is overcome. But obviously there are lots. I'm just trying to think of like the key ones to put you on the right track. So let me have a look here. Oh, yeah, another good one. I mean, again, film, Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, great film, came out recently. That's obviously around World War II, dropping of the bomb. That's a good one to talk about. Links nicely to Metropolis in terms of post-World War I. This is post-World War II and looking at the ongoing kind of ripple effects of that and the moral cost of scientific progress. So I think Oppenheimer and Parasite as recent films are really good for Worlds of Upheaval. Oppenheimer just got the Oscar for Best Film. Parasite got the Oscar for Best Film. So you're looking at two critically acclaimed films that are clearly amazing films by way of consensus. A really good short film animation that I came across that I actually used in my extension was called The Doomsday Clock. I think it was by someone, Jonathan Hodgson or something like that. I'm going to quickly check that out. Maybe I'm wrong on the last name there. Let's see. I mean, it was commissioned by the United Nations. Hodgson. Yeah, I think it was Jonathan Hodgson. So that's a really good one. That's called The Doomsday Clock. And that was, you know, Cold War. That's a short film animation, right? Cold War commissioned. And that's a really good one, Jonathan Hodgson. And then that's also good because it's an animation. It's different to the Metropolis style of film. And it's also different to a novel. If you want to do a speech, I find that speeches, this is a really good tip for anyone listening here. If you are looking for related texts, If you're doing related texts and you want to stand out, go and look at some famous speeches given by US presidents, for instance. Maybe it's someone else, it doesn't have to be US president, but look at the speeches around the time of the Cold War. So after 1945, all the way up to 1990, go and find some of the famous speeches. Dwight Eisenhower had a speech, Atoms for Peace. He was trying to very cleverly achieve a result of nuclear disarmament because the US was up against the Soviet Union and they're both producing all these nuclear weapons, but we want to bring that down. And, he's quite cunning with his use of language, and you've got to question his motives. Does he just want to have the upper hand? And does he want America to just hold on to the nuclear weapons and, modern day Russia not have any? Good to look at how he's trying to diffuse the situation and de-escalate. Okay, de-escalate. Hello, Shivy from India. Great to see you. Hello, welcome. Love India. One of the favorite places that I've been. I went to India, Mumbai. Where else did we go? Goa, Kerala. Fantastic place. Taj Mahal. Seen it all. Okay, I actually saw barely anything because India is such a big place. But back to what I was saying. Presidential speeches around the time of the Cold War, trying to de-escalate nuclear tensions, that's a good thing for Worlds of Upheaval because it's a good response-orientated text, okay? Dr. Strangelove, yeah, that's another Cold War text. All the Cold War ones, if you go back and look at all the prescribed texts for the old syllabus where they had a unit called After the Bomb, right? That's kind of what Worlds of Upheaval is based on loosely. So if you go and have a look at After the Bomb, NESA, or Board of Studies prescriptions from back in the day, you're going to find a list of other texts, not all of which are on the new list. So you'd be able to use a lot of those. Dr. Strangelove was a really common one when I was doing After the Bomb. So hopefully that helps. Oh, fellow Indian. There we go. Love the Indian presence here. Beautiful. All right, what other questions do we have? Struggling with a good thesis for Module A textual conversation. Do you have any tips to make one? I mean, yes, I do. I mean, when you want to create an effective thesis, it does depend on the module, of course, right? And it depends on what you're calling a thesis. So I wouldn't really think too much about the thesis to begin with. I would just think about the introductory paragraph. In terms of what you call the thesis, it could be the first sentence, it could be the last, it could be the whole thing, right? But I would think about the textual conversation at a very high level. So, ask yourself this question. What is the value of a textual conversation? And when you're thinking about that, consider how meaning transforms over time, but also how certain elements, certain universal truths are preserved over time. So if I'm thinking about Tempest and Hagseed, I'm thinking about texts that have been produced 400 years apart. I'm going to think that, okay, the Tempest written by Shakespeare is going to have some themes, some elements there that transcend contextual boundaries because they speak to a deeper human truth that still is true and still resonates with a contemporary audience, right? But then I'm also going to think that all of the contextual flavoring around the exploration of that concern. So it might be things to do with how humans tend to feel imprisoned, or how humans tend to express themselves through performance, or they try to control through performative mediums. Well, those things are innately human, but the way that it takes place in a text like The Tempest is going to be flavored with that kind of Jacobean context. And it's going to speak to things about the supernatural. And it's going to have things relating to the age of discovery and Renaissance humanism. And it's going to try and connect with its audience. So it's connecting with its specific audience in terms of the particular reflection, but it's also tapping into a deeper human component that remains true today. So that's what the thesis needs to get at. And what it really needs to get at when you're talking about Hagseed as an adaptation is that Hagseed does two things. It preserves that resonant universal spirit of The Tempest. It preserves the performative spirit of it. It preserves the metatextuality of it, but it also transforms it. So it does its own thing. And the key point that I would take away from it is that Hagseed is demonstrating that by taking a previous text, an earlier text, and experimenting with it in order to resonate with a contemporary audience, we understand more deeply how you can create something new out of something old. That's a thesis for you. That whole textual conversation to me demonstrates how you can create something new out of something old by tapping into the universal ideas that resonate over time, but also flavoring it with contextually specific elements so as to connect with a modern audience. And just like that, you've got a really nice overarching thesis. You can then dig deeper into those specific ideas, how they change in Hagseed compared to the Tempest, and so forth. I would talk about imprisonment and then freedom from that imprisonment. How do the texts explore different types of imprisonment and why? How does Atwood play with the idea of imprisonment by having an actual prison? Prospero was imprisoned on an island, but it wasn't an actual prison, but it felt like a prison because he was exiled, he was isolated. Lots of the other characters feel imprisoned as well. So Atwood very often makes literal what was initially metaphorical. Shakespeare was talking about the performativity of life, how life itself is temporary and personas, the facades that people put on are temporary. People play all different kinds of characters to suit their needs, to fit a particular agenda. Everyone listening, I'm sure you can relate to this, right? Do you find that you talk differently, you speak differently and act differently when you're around your family versus when you're with your friends? So something's going on there. You've got these different social identities that are constantly recalibrating based on different environments. So there is a natural performativity. Do you find sometimes if you want to get your way, you carry on a little bit, you're a bit dramatic, right? There's a performativity inherent to the human experience, right? Just to bring that up as well. And Shakespeare was well aware of that. And he was aware that as a playwright, if he was creating a play and it was being performed for an audience, that he had a certain level of control over that audience. So that was his way of controlling. And humans like to control things, right? They like to feel in control so that they don't feel like they're in a state of chaos. That's a human feeling. Shakespeare's way of controlling was through theater itself. That's why Atwood plays upon that. And she actually has the play, The Tempest, be performed at the direction of Felix in Hagseed. So you can see the performativity links. You can see that both of them are talking about that natural inclination towards performativity. Atwood's really speaking to the fact that performance can be this mode of catharsis. It can actually help you express feelings. It can help you overcome certain experiences like grief that Felix goes through. So there's a lot of depth to that study. Don't go too deep in too many different areas because you're going to get confused. Imprisonment, freedom, and remember, Atwood's preserving some things. She's changing other things. She's showing how experimenting with earlier texts is a way of innovating and creating something new, which is a very postmodern act. Okay, it's an example of postmodernism, experimentation with something old to create something new. That plays into the idea that there really is no more originality. Originality comes from subverting and experimenting with things that have already been made, like Shakespeare's plays. Hope that helps. A bit of a rant on that one. Patrick, let me know what link you're looking for. You're looking for a link to anything in particular there? Oh, a link to the old HSC, I assume you mean, right? Let me see if I can find that for you. I'm going to put a link in there. Just bear with me. See if I can find a direct link. Let me know any other questions that you guys might have. I'm just going to find this link that I think will be helpful. Here we go. Interesting. Yeah, you can look at these. Just make sure these texts are not on the new text list for English Advanced, Standard, or Extension. So, Gotto was on the old one as well. Good night and good luck's on the new one. Sylvia Plath's also on the new one. And actually, the only one here is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, John le Carre, the prose fiction text there. Okay, I think there's also a film adaptation, but you don't even need the list. That's just another one to consider. John le Carre, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, good one to look at. I think you got hopefully enough there. Okay, another question. After the HSC, when markers are given a limited amount of time to review each student's paper, how does a marker know how to differentiate between a Band 6, Band 4, 5 response? How can I leverage this knowledge to understand where my essays are lacking and what I need to change? Are there certain general guidelines I can adopt as to how I can create a Band 6 response? Okay. I'm going to answer this, or I'm going to attempt to answer this. So obviously there's a marking criteria. Let's just start there. You can look at that. It's available online. NESA, marking criteria. Go and have a look at it. It's attached to any of the past papers. That's worded pretty broadly. So it's not as helpful for a student, right? It's helpful for teachers. They understand what each of those particular elements actually means. But in practical terms, it's not as useful for a student. So I'm with you in terms of, that's quite confusing. What does distinguish? I mean, it obviously depends on the type of task, but yeah, the marker is looking for sophistication of, actually, I'll tell you the three things. I want to, because there's so many ways I could answer this. I don't want to get too specific, but let's say you're looking at an essay, right? Here are the three categories to be mindful of. How well do you answer the question? Okay, so you should write these down. How well do I answer the question? In terms of answering the question, do you just repeat the question? Like, do you mention the question, but you repeat it? Or are you Band 6 and you expand on the question? So I'm just going to give you the key tips for each one. In terms of how well you answer the question, which is one of three key categories that will be on the criteria. How well do they answer the question? Do you expand on the key terms of the question and offer a specific idea about it in response to the question? Or are you just repeating the words again and again without saying anything more? So do you truly respond to the question by elaborating on those key terms and actually relating them together? Like if there's a question about form and a particular idea, what are you saying to actually relate those together? How does the form support that idea? And have you fleshed out the idea enough? Have you actually provided a very specific and insightful point? Or have you just kind of listed a bunch of terms that all sound the same? That's Band 4, maybe 5. So unpacking the key terms of the question. That's how you'll satisfy that first one. The second one is how well have you used evidence? So you got answering the question, use of evidence. How well do you use evidence? Biggie, smalls. Have you used a lot of form? Do you refer to the structure? Do you refer to the voice? Do you refer to the perspective or voice there? Do you refer to form and genre a lot? Do you refer to those broader stylistic elements throughout? Do you do that at least once per paragraph? And do you do it in a specific way? Don't just say Shakespeare's dramatic form or Shakespeare uses a play. You need to actually say something about it. Just something a little more than that. Like Shakespeare engages his audience through the visceral nature of the dramatic form. So you're saying it's visceral, that when you actually watch a play, you feel it in your body, right? Because you're seeing it happen right in front of you. So offer one specific insight on form and combine those elements of form, at least one per body paragraph in all of your essays, with more specific language features, okay? Make sure that, so that's the thing, biggie smalls, make sure you're talking about form and specific techniques, and avoid storytelling. So lead your sentences with techniques and make sure that what you say about your quotes and techniques is specific. So do I say something specific about that quote or technique that I've just introduced? That's how you'll kind of tick the band 6 boxes in terms of use of evidence. There are lots of other things as well. Make sure that the evidence is ordered properly so that your ideas are evolving. But let's go to the third category, which kind of relates to that, which is written expression. So you've got, how well do you answer the question? How well have you used evidence to support your argument? And how well have you written the response generally? So your vocabulary, your sophistication, how well have you ordered your ideas? Are you using correct grammar? Are you too clunky? Like a band 4, band 5 usually has lots of commas. It's hard to follow. Or are you more punchy and impactful? The sentences are well considered, but they're not too long. Okay, so don't be clunky. Don't have too many commas. Make sure that everything's grammatically correct. Make sure that your arguments are ordered correctly so that you're actually building up. Here's the problem. Here's the consequence of that problem. And here's how you can overcome that problem. And you're bringing in different pieces of evidence to support each of those ideas. So how will you answer the question? How do you use evidence? And how well have you actually written the response in terms of your vocabulary, sophistication? They all kind of interrelate at some level. They're the 3 categories. If you can keep coming back to them when you're reviewing your work and be mindful of the specific points I just gave you about what they're looking at, that will help you differentiate and get closer to that band 6. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I don't want to go too in depth or get too specific into certain types of text or modules. You need to go and look at those criteria, but I would keep those 3 things in mind, especially when it comes to the essays, right? Which is 60%. If you're doing the HSE, 60% of your final mark in the exam comes from essays because you've got common mod, mod A, mod B. Then you've got craft of writing and section 1. Keep that in mind. I want to take one more question here. I know I had some other responses here, but we've been on a roll with some of these other questions. Again, I'll check in soon to go through another response. I'll even keep chipping away at these in my own time. We can post them on the YouTube channel. Make sure you always check in on YouTube to see the new content. I'll be doing some of this review material in a more edited way. So it's like very punchy to the point so that you can get those insights quickly. And I'll also be publishing, interviews with people who got 99.95 ATARs and first in the state. We've got lots of great interviews coming out, material on that, so that you guys can actually learn exactly what those top students are doing. Not so that you have to get the exact mark, but so you can do some of the things that will help you improve your marks. Doesn't matter where you're at. You can always learn from people who are doing well. Module B. For Module B, how do we structure the essay? Like how many paragraphs and techniques? For a Module B essay where you're just looking at one text, I would aim to do 3 body paragraphs, subject to a specific teacher's instruction. If your teacher wants something for your internal assessment, do that. Keep them happy. They're the ones who are going to be probably marking that internally. But generally speaking, Module B essays, when you're looking at one text only, just like with the common mod for your final exam, there's no related text in the final exam or trials unless your teacher suggests otherwise for the trial. 3 body paragraphs. So introduction, 3 paragraphs, conclusion, short conclusion. Really well-considered introduction you need, okay? Introduction's the first thing that the marker looks at. Don't go in and think, oh, I'm just going to write a new introduction based on the question. No. You need to create the band 6 impression from the get-go, which means you need to put the most preparation into those introductions. You just need to be super prepared at adapting and changing it, but you need to have a foundation. It's crazy to go into an exam and think, I'm just going to write the introduction on the spot. That is going to determine whether you're going to get a band 6 or band 5 or band 4 or band 3. It's set in that benchmark. It's very hard to have an introduction that's band 4 and then have amazing body paragraphs and get a band 6. It just doesn't work that way. You need to come out strong. You need to prepare a lot for your introduction. The conclusion is the least important paragraph. I got away when I did the exams with one sentence conclusions, still got full marks at times. So because I was running out of time, I only ever prepared to do 2 anyway. Okay, so if you can do those concluding sentences really concisely, you can focus more on the meat of the essay, which would be the bodies. So 3 bodies for a Module B essay. How do you structure it? I like to go with that. What's the problem? Set out the problem at the start. What's the big conflict? What's the point of conflict, the tension? That's your first body paragraph. Then what's the response to that? Okay, it might be a follow-on problem, but what's the consequence? I have this problem. Here's the consequence of that problem. Okay, is there a solution? That's the third one. Is the problem resolved, or does the composer suggest there is a way or a means of resolving? Like even in T.S. Eliot's poetry, even though you're looking at 5 poems, if you look at ones that concentrate on particular aspects, you'll see it fit into that structure. For instance, the first problem might be, hey, we're in this industrialized world and there's a loss of spiritual meaning. People don't know where to look. But then I might focus on preludes, or there are other ones as well. I mean, Holoman somewhat, but I like preludes as the opener. Rhapsody is another good one to begin with when you're talking about urbanization. And then towards the end of the essay, if you're talking about resolution, well, maybe we need to have a renewed faith. Maybe we need to go back to religion, Christianity. And then you can look at Journey of the Magi, right? So Magi would be a really nice one for your third body paragraph for Eliot, whereas preludes might be more appropriate for the first. And then maybe you find a way to talk about, okay, you've got industrialization, you've got all this social change, then Prufrock fits in the middle, and you talk about, oh, well, also there's been a destabilization of gender roles and masculinity. Okay, so it's kind of like a flow on, or maybe it's like a second problem before you come to that possible solution. Hopefully that makes sense. That's how I think about the Module B essay structure. All of this stuff with examples is at Jeddle.com. Just subscribe to the resources for your text. You can get a bundle for advanced, standard, extension, and it's discounted that way. And that will be of huge help for you. So go to Jeddle.com. Our AI marking and feedback tools are working. They're live. Sign up to Jedd-AI. You can get it for a term. You can get it for the rest of the year, whatever you prefer. But let me know if you have any questions about that, because I think that's a revolutionary tool that we've developed, and we're still fine-tuning over time so that it's as accurate as possible. But everything you saw me doing on Jeddle platform, it was using the Jedd-AI framework, okay? So go to Jeddle.com. Click on the resources if you want to get all of this essay material, you want to get all your analysis covered, everything there, ready to go, put it into your essays. Perfect, that's there. Or you can click Jedd-AI, or do both. A lot of people do both. Go to Jedd-AI, subscribe to it, and then you can access our feedback and marking anytime. You can actually get the AI-generated feedback whenever you want, or you can actually get access to, myself, others, teachers, experienced HSE markers. All of these experts are available as part of our community. So you've got those 2 options. We're trying to create the ultimate feedback platform for students. Sometimes having a tutor isn't enough. A lot of you might see a tutor 1 hour a week, right? I still help students as well through tutoring, but that's 1 hour a week typically. What about when you just need that feedback right away? We've programmed it all in onto Jedd-AI, okay? So Jeddle.com is where to look there. Really appreciate you guys tuning in here. Yeah, that's where you'll find the resources. Appreciate the feedback. Amar, thanks for joining. If I didn't get to your responses, I'll do my best to get to them next time. Link at the bottom if you want to go into that. And then Mohammed, maybe I got one more question for the people who have stuck around. I think I can do one more question here. I'm talking a lot about English Advanced and Standard. What would you recommend for EALD students in terms of essay length and time management? Keeping in mind we only get 30 minutes. All right, great question, Mahmoud. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Mahmoud, thank you for the question. I hope you're still on, because it started to sound like I was, signing off there. For people who are doing EALD, which is a lot of students, right? 30 minutes, I'm looking more at the 2-paragraph structure. 2-paragraph structure. Okay, Mahmoud, again, sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, but great question. 2 paragraphs is what you're aiming for, and aim to include at least 3 pieces of evidence. So 3 quotes in each of those paragraphs, 4 if you can. I would really push for 4, But you know what the trick is? Time yourself, write in a draft essay, and if you can't get 4 pieces of evidence in around 25 minutes, because we have to allow some time for adapting to the new question, I would actually say 24 minutes based on my rule of 80%. So in 20, what can you write in 24 minutes? Can you do a 3 to 4 sentence introduction? No more than 4 sentences. Can you do 2 body paragraphs with at least 3 quotes and techniques in each of them? And can you do a conclusion that has up to 2 sentences, right? Test yourself on that. If you can do that in around 24, 25 minutes, great. If you can do it in even less, maybe you can add in a little bit more evidence, but aim for that minimum of 3 quotes, 3 techniques, and 2 body paragraphs. So introduction, 2 body paragraphs, conclusion. That's for EALD. Hope that helps you with essay length, time management. 24 minutes is what I would be aiming for in terms of my target time when I'm doing a draft, because that gives you 6 minutes spare to adapt to a new question, and make sure you practice looking at different questions so that you're prepared for those cases. So for all the EALD students, if you've got 30 minutes, I'd go for a 2-paragraph approach, 2 body paragraph, and make sure that you can write out your draft in around 24 minutes. Still memorize. Memorizing is going to help you a lot. It's going to help you a ton, actually. There are so many students in EALD in particular that I've spoken to, and they're not memorizing anything. And I know they're capable of doing it because I've seen heaps of the successful EALD students do it. And they're trying to learn their core materials, learn as much as they can, really working hard, and it's paying off massively for them because they're differentiating themselves from all the students who have left it a bit last minute. They're going in, they're giving it their best, but they're not as well prepared. They haven't learned those materials. They're not ready to go with their arguments, their topic sentences, their quotes. So just memorizing your quotes and techniques and your 2 core ideas for your topic sentences is going to set you apart from majority of the students doing the course. So make sure you're doing those things to give yourself that advantage and just to help yourself do as well as you can. You've got to prepare the right way. And thinking about structure like you are, thinking about time management, actually testing yourself a week or 2, at least 2 weeks before your exam, and figuring out how much you can write in 24, 25 minutes, that's going to be key. Sad Salt, appreciate it. All right, Amar, always watching the videos. Appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. Let me know what you guys want to see more of with the videos as well. Always keen to help in the areas that you need it most. How many techniques we should put per paragraph for the Mod B essay? Yeah, of course. I have time. I have time for you. So how many techniques per paragraph? Just remember what I said with the EALD advice, okay? Even for English Standard Advanced, you have to time yourself and be realistic about what you can actually manage. It's going to depend on how fast you write, and make sure that you're writing in a legible way. Teachers are really getting onto this, especially because everyone's typing so much these days. The handwriting's just gone crazy in terms of legibility. Like it's not even readable in most cases, but you're still examined that way. So you need to balance the typed up drafts with actual handwritten practice. And when you do your handwritten practice, time yourself. How much can you write in around 32 minutes? If you've got a 40-minute slot or a 40-minute allotment for an essay, that actually is about 32 minutes for your draft. So how much can you write? If you're doing 3 body paragraphs in Mod B, I would be aiming for up to 4 quotes, 4 techniques. So every quote has to have a technique connected to it, every key quote. You can also use smaller quotes throughout to complement your analysis. They don't need techniques, but you should have like the 1 core quote and technique per sentence of analysis or per piece of analysis. Maybe it's over 2 sentences. But you need to be realistic. Can you actually do that? Maybe you have to do 3 only. So I'd say 3 to 4 is the range, and then time yourself and see what's actually doable. Because what's more important than having 4 pieces of evidence per paragraph is having a complete essay where the marker can say, yep, he's done intro, clear argument with good evidence, and a conclusion to finish. That's going to help you do better than having 1 more quote in a couple of paragraphs and then not even finishing the last body. Excuse me. Hopefully that helps. All right. Excuse me. Is it possible? Have I ever seen an HSC student do average internally but really well in the HSC? Absolutely. I see heaps of students do that. It's not ideal because if you do really well in the HSC, but you kind of slacked off during the year, so you only came good at the end. I mean, to be honest, it's better than not doing it. And it's really good if you could do that. But it's a shame looking back because often the student's like, oh, if only I tried that hard throughout, because your rank was already solidified. So in the HSC, I see heaps of students step up. They weren't happy with their internal rank because they didn't prepare enough before their assessments. So maybe their rank ended up being like 50th in the year. Then they realize, wow, I'm just going to go hard. I'm going to prepare everything. I'm going to time out my essays. I'm going to memorize them. I'm going to ask for lots of feedback. That is the secret. That's why we created the feedback platform on Jeddle with Jedd-AI. So if you go there and you get lots of feedback and you improve the essays again and again, and then memorize them and make sure that you can write them out well under the allocated time, so like 32 to 34 minutes, and then you look at lots of different practice questions and practice adapt in, especially your introduction and topic sentences, that formula I just laid out is what I see heaps of students ramp up. They do that preparation and then they nail. Some of them have come first in their year in the actual HSCs. They might pull out like a 95, 96, maybe a bit higher. Had a student do 98, but they were ranked pretty high. But I've seen people get in the 90s and they were ranked in the middle of their cohort, but they ramped up their study. It just comes down to the preparation. And then that meant that they got a really good exam mark. They got an average assessment mark because they had to take the rank, the equivalent mark, for their rank. But the average of the exam mark and assessment was still really good. So if you do really well in the HSC, but you had a poor rank, so you got a poor internal mark, you can still end up doing really well. You definitely don't want to slack off, though. If you've got a good internal rank, do not take that for granted because everything comes down to the HSC marks. So, yeah, if you're doing really well internally, you've got to keep it up. And if you haven't done as well internally, don't worry. You can still claw back a lot of marks by doing well in the exam. No, you don't miss out on your overall mark. So you know how the final exam mark is, people say it's worth 50%. And to some extent, that's true, right? Let's just look at it in a simple way. What you do in your final HSC, let's say you do the English paper and you get a 90. You get 90 in your final English exam. That's your HSC mark. So that you got 90% on that final paper. You got 90 out of 100 across those 5 sections. That's not your final mark. That's what you got for the HSC exam component. Now let's say that your rank was 50th in the year. What happens is you've locked in the 90 that you got in the HSC exam. Okay, it's not your overall mark, but you've locked in 90, which is half of the final mark. And then because you came 50th in your year, and I'm simplifying this, whatever the 50th best mark was in the HSC is your assessment mark. So that way it's nothing to do with your actual internal mark. It's everything to do with your rank, because otherwise schools could do really easy tests and they're giving everyone a way higher internal mark. So we don't look at that. We look at, okay, you came 50th. So let's say the person in your grade at your school who came 50th in terms of the exam mark, let's say the 50th best HSC exam mark for your school was 80. Well, you get 80 as your assessment mark, but you got 90 because you performed really well in the HSC. So your exam mark was 90, your assessment mark is 80, you get the average of those 2 marks. So your overall mark is 85. Okay? That's how it works in a probably oversimplifying it, but that's effectively how it works. So your rank is really important because the rank will tell you which mark you're going to get out of the exam results from your cohort. But you also get to keep your own exam mark as well. So 50% of the final mark is how you do in the final exam, and the other 50% is how, maybe it's you, but it's how well someone else did in your year, whose mark corresponds to your rank internally. Is there hope for me to get a good band 6 if I'm around top 10 internally, currently in a school ranked about? Yeah, of course there is. Look, especially if you're not at a school that's, top 50 or whatever, you can still do incredibly well. Top 10 internally, that's a really great start. Get as close to the top as you can. But ultimately, you really want to help the people at the top because you might have an off day during the HSC. It's very likely that you'll have like kind of one off exam. Maybe you just cruise through all of them, but typically, you might struggle with one section of the exam or something. And if your mark wasn't as good as you had hoped, well, at least for your assessment mark, if your rank was really high, someone else might save you because they did really well. So you want everyone in your year to do really well in the HSC because half of your final mark is going to be dependent on how others have done effectively. So even if you're in a school that's ranked low, it doesn't matter about where the school's ranked. It just matters about how did you go on the final exam and where were you ranked and how well did your school, your peers go, especially the people around the top 10. If you're around the top 10, you want the top 10 to do really well because that will be half of your mark. And then you get your exam mark as the other half. That's it. The fact that your school's 150 has nothing to do with anything. The school rank has nothing to do with anything in terms of determining your mark. It's how well you go on the final exam. That's 50%. And if you were ranked first and then you came first in the final exam, you're only dealing with your own mark. So the school rank has absolutely nothing to do with it. You want your cohort to do well, though, and your school rank will be a reflection of that. But it doesn't mean, by virtue of the fact that your school has a low rank overall, that that's going to impact your marks. It doesn't directly impact anything, but it's a reflection of the amount of band 6s that the school's producing. So you want to be as close to the top as possible. You want to go really well in the final exam. The fact that your school overall got a lower rank might not impact anything. Okay? Carry yourself up. Help the people in your cohort because the better they all do, the better you're likely to do overall because of the assessment mark component, which is going to be dependent on your rank and getting someone else's exam mark. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes the exam mark ranking thing's confusing. I should just bring up a simple diagram and explain it, but I'll do that in a separate video. I have a video about scaling on YouTube, so you can check that out. Anyway, I'm mindful of the time, but also mindful that I want to make sure no one's confused on any of those final points. Any confusion there? Anything that you want cleared up? Otherwise, I'm going to end this stream. We'll do another one soon. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, being part of the community here. Again, if you're not part of the official, you guys are the official Jeddle community. Anyone on here is part of the official Jeddle community. But, if you want to be more embedded, jump on Jeddle.com. Check out Jedd-AI. That's the new tool. Been building that for over a year. It's incredible. And you're getting access to the experts as well that are part of Jeddle when you want to get feedback for something. So really cool tool. It basically gives you access to 24/7 tutors in a sense. And you can use the AI marking as well to help you. So jump onto that. Thank you guys so much for being on here. Kat, great to see you. I know you've been, I'm pretty sure I've seen you on here before. Thank you so much. Guys, let me know. You can shoot me an email as well. Contact us on Jeddle.com. Any of the types of videos that you want to see on here. Happy to help in any way I can. And appreciate the gratitude. Much appreciated. Means a lot. I'm happy to help. And, I want everyone just to do as well as they can. I know, having gone through the experience, it's just a matter of hard work. It's just a matter of strategy, right? In terms of doing well. And, there's so much more stuff, I'm keen to kind of go into with you guys, especially even, when you finish school, talking about uni, talking about life after school. There's all these chapters that are to come, which are exciting for you. And, I'm not getting too nostalgic, but when I look back at the periods, this final year 12 one, this is a big one. This is the most intense year you'll have exam-wise. Uni's kind of just little spurts throughout. So go as hard as you can for this. You may as well. You'll never look back and think, I wish I didn't work so hard in year 12. Like, no one ever says that. Sometimes people say that in the real world. I wish I didn't work so hard and miss time with my kids. That's something to worry about later. No one's going to look back and regret working too hard in year 12, unless you're like missing every social event to do well. I wouldn't be doing that because I think you can definitely do both. So you got to socialize, make the most of 18th and things like that. That's all good fun, but school sport, etc., big parts of it. But yeah, there's a lot to this picture. But just go hard, go for it, and you'll do well. And it's all over soon as well if you're in year 12. I know some of you are not in year 12. No matter what year you're in here, just keep working hard and implement the feedback here and get feedback as well. Ask for help. That's the key here. Can I make a video about how to prepare for Module C, Craft of Writing? Yeah, for sure. Go and check out all our existing Craft of Writing ones as well, Amar. If you go on the Jeddle YouTube page, go and look up. I think you can search by way of category, and we've categorized a lot of the Craft of Writing ones. Have a look at all of that and see if there's something there that helps. Email me if there's a particular thing I've missed, because I'd be keen to fill any gaps there. If it's just how do you prepare in general, maybe we haven't addressed that explicitly. So that's a good point. I'll make a note of that. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great evening. Better jump off. Better make my way home now. And wishing you all the best. I'll try and jump on next week. If not next week, the week after. But definitely would love to do some weekly check-ins. Otherwise, shoot me over an email if you have any questions. Jump on Jedd-AI. Get on Jedd-AI, and you can get feedback from us when you like. So all the best. And enjoy this start of term 2. Thanks, guys.